Well, you're back for more. In this multi-video series on multivariate mapping, we are wrapping it up with a how-to make video for multivariate mapping in ArcGIS Online. Yes, ArcGIS Online. You could do multivariate mapping in ArcGIS Online, and I'm going to show you a few ways to do it. Well, here we are in ArcGIS Online, and I've added from Living Atlas an American community survey about the labor force. Now I'm just showing you a white to black, unnormalized choropleth map of total population in a non-equal area projection. I'm just going to get that right out of the way first. We'll address that in a little bit. Here we are showing totals, but I'm interested in comparing total population to the percent of young workers in the past year, this crazy year that we've had. How do I do something like that? Well, I can just duplicate this layer and use a second symbology scheme, which is a graduated symbol symbology. And this time it would be using the percentage of age 16 to 19 who have worked in the last year. And we're just using the size of these circles to represent that proportion. We're getting a lot safer as far as the right thing to do in cartography. We do have some issue of overlap. I can see total population. I can see the symbology of the circle size showing me the proportion of youth who are working right now. But instead of using two layers that cover each other up, is there any way to bake in both of these values into one layer? And we can get rid of this underlying choropleth total layer. The answer is yes. Let's do that. First of all, I'll just turn off my underlying total population choropleth. Instead of a graduated symbology for this, let's instead use the total population to drive the size of these symbols. I think that'll be a lot better. And I'll add this field and I'll search for total population, age 16 and over, and I'll add this. Okay, now by default, Smart Mapping has said, hey, actually it's a pretty good idea to use graduated symbology for this total data, which is profoundly helpful. And I love that. Thank you, Smart Mapping. So this is total population. How do we bake in that young people in the workforce attribute? I'm just going to add a second field. And this one conveniently is right near the top. Percentage of the population age 16 to 19 who have worked in the last 12 months. I'll add this. And now Smart Mapping is churning and it's saying, okay, I've got you covered. We're going to use size for the, oh my goodness, it's reversed. Okay, well, let's just dig in and flip this. I'll just rearrange these two attributes that I've added. I'll drag this one to the top. And now we have something that makes a lot more sense. The size of something proportionate to the actual size of the underlying population. And then we have coloration referring to the percentage of people age 16 to 19 who have worked. I'm actually baking two values into one symbol, two visual dimensions into one symbol, a bivariate map. Well, can we get crazy and add additional dimensions of data into this visualization? Absolutely. Now, the census is incredibly helpful in that they publish uncertainty data about their attributes. And if we go into the style options here, there's an option for transparency by attribute and rotation by attribute. Rotation, in our case, isn't going to help us a lot because we're working with circles. But if you had an arrow or a bar, you could do something cool with rotation. But I'm going to work with transparency. So I'll expand transparency. I'll say yes, activate this. And for the field, I'll say the margin of error. So if I choose this, I now have a margin of error attribute driving opacity. And if I have a very high margin of error, I want it to be 90% transparent or almost invisible. If I have a low margin of error, that means I'm very confident. And I want this to be 0% transparent. And now we're using opacity or transparency, which is the reverse of opacity, to bake in a visual dimension of uncertainty into our data. We're not terribly certain, well then it's going to be more transparent. There's another very interesting symbology option here. And first let me just delete these things. I'll start with a clean slate and I'll add a field for percent population 16 to 19 who worked, the one we've been working with. And I'm going to add people on the other end of that spectrum, percent of the population over 65 who have worked in the last year. I'll add both of these attributes. You can see my attributes here. And again, by default, Smart Mapping is going to want to do a graduated and colored symbology, which is cool, but I don't want to do that. I want to do a relationship map. So this is a bivariate choropleth map. And what it does is it color grades in one data dimension and another data dimension and dynamically blends those colors to show you some pretty interesting relationships. Darker areas show you where there's a high proportion of young and older employees. Bluer areas are showing you where there's a higher proportion of young workers, and orange areas are showing you where there's a higher proportion of older workers compared to young workers. So an older workforce, a younger workforce, lots of both are working, or very few of both are working. Very interesting visual result. This is called a relationship map or a bivariate choropleth map. So there you have it, just a handful of ways to make multivariate maps in ArcGIS Online. And I hope you enjoyed the whole series. Check out part 1, which talks about multivariate maps in general, and part 2, which shows you how to make a bunch of different multivariate maps in ArcGIS Pro.